in most spiritual traditions, in most religions in the world, and even several secular languages, the same word, one word, can mean breath or spirit.
It would be perfectly appropriate for every single people to tell their people that they are chosen, so that they feel responsible for their mission and whatever it is that they're doing.
How many more millionaires do we need to, and gazillionaires, who have all the money, all the power that you could ever want, and they're miserable?
No one has to believe it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be real or not.
As long as it works.
Yeah, right? Because the lie is that
Yes.
like the material life has something to offer,
That it's fulfilling.
and as long as you don't have it, you can assume that it might just have it. And as you start getting it,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's not. Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Eli Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome all. I'm sitting here with Christian de la Huerta, a author, speaker, and transformational coach, breathwork therapist. That's where I met you first, as a breathwork practitioner. Right. So I still remember it in. I always get confused between Coconut Grove and Coral Gables. Remember that house?
I was in the Grove. Yeah.
In the Grove.
Yeah.
Right, so you had done. This was little before COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there for 10 years.
No, I'm saying when I came there.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I went there for a breathwork, and I mean, in every space you can fit a human body, there was someone on the floor.
Two stories.
Yeah, 2 stories. It was on the top of the steps, alongside a bed, at the front door. It was just everywhere.
Yeah, we used to get, like, up until the pandemic, like 30, 35 people at most.
Oh, yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
The energy in there, and I guess you had a few helpers.
I had people who train with me. So when we outgrew the first story, and we had to move to the second story, then I needed assistance.
I got you. They were training under you to learn what you do instead of
exactly.
Learn in this way.
Exactly. Which is the best way to learn.
Yeah,
like the old time apprenticeship. You learn as you do. Like in the moment, watching, that's why I did that. That's why I played that piece of music then.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's what I want to do actually in this conversation. Is I've spoken a lot about breathwork, but you're the first person I worked with, not in breathwork, but the first person with transformational type breathwork experiences, meaning the first breathwork experience I had that kind of felt similar to a psychedelic experience was with you in those homes in Coconut Grove. Obviously, after COVID, anytime I worked with you was more private. We did one with my wife and I not long ago, which was really cool.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to dive deep into breathwork. You've been at this for
33 years.
33 years. Breathwork.
Yeah.
Do you remember how you got into it?
Sure. I was still working in healthcare, marketing. I used to work for a psychiatric and addictions hospital in Miami. And it was a nice kind of cushy job because I had wined and dined a lot of referral sources. So psychiatrists and doctors and psychologists and the police, that kind of thing. So I had something to do at night. So I was laying out by the pool in the morning, and I was reading something spiritual, and some guy that lived in the building came down and saw us, so we started to talk, and he said something about breath work, and it was like an immediate yes. Like I didn't even need to know that much about it. It's like I knew somewhere in me that it was the next thing for me to do, and like a few months later I did it, and it changed my life, my first session.
Was there a thing before when you say it was something for you to do? Was there something that were you kind of on the spiritual path somewhat, and this was another avenue, or were you not there at all and this became the first?
I was sort of starting to explore again. Like I grew up in a really religious environment, a very Catholic environment. And then in my 20s, I kind of threw the baby out with the baptismal water and wanted nothing to do with anything.
I say threw the baby out with?
With the baptismal water.
I got you. Yeah.
It just, realized that religion didn't have room for me, that it wasn't a right match. And so my 20s, I mostly, dedicated to my professional growth, to my personal growth, but not from a spiritual perspective. And then as I approached the end of my 30s, I started to think, I was pretty successful. And the more that I had, the more that I was sought after, professionally or personally, I just kept thinking there has to be more to life.
Right.
Like it was like I had an expanding hole in my gut. And so I started to search. And then
it's kind of like that lie gets exposed a little bit. right? Because
Yeah.
the lie is that
Yes.
like the material life has something to offer,
That it's fulfilling.
and as long as you don't have it, you can assume that
Yeah.
it might just have it. And as you start getting it,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not what they
It's
said it
not
was.
enough. It's
Right.
not enough. I mean, it's not knocking it. Like the abundance in this world, there's nothing wrong with it. Like it certainly buys us the freedom and it buys us the ability to do things that are really good for ourselves, for our family, our loved ones, for the world. But it's not where the happiness is going to be found.
Right.
Like, no, how many more millionaires do we need to, and gazillionaires who have all the money, all the power that you could ever want, and they're miserable. And they have drug addictions, all these celebrities, suicide rate. So we know that's not where the answer is.
Correct. Yeah.
And so I started to look eastward. So I started to look into Buddhism and Hinduism. And so I was reading something about that. I don't remember what it was that I was reading, but as soon as I heard breathwork, it was like the easiest enrollment ever. I said, yep, tell me when, how much.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And then what it was holotropic breathwork. That's where.
No, it's called, at the time it was called rebirthing. Holotropic is longer, kind of a very similar pattern, but it's longer. You do it for 3, sometimes even 4 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So your first experience was a 3-4 hour?
No. My first experience was just what I do, like an hour,
Gotcha.
an hour and a half. Yeah. And I did it in a group like you did the first time too.
Very cool. And that's after that you were hooked?
After that, I did 10 one-on-one sessions like you and I did with the teacher that I eventually trained with.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
And then from there, you left your professional career and focused on this?
That was October. By the next June, I quit my job and sold my condo, ended a relationship, gave away or sold most of my belongings, and went off on a spiritual journey.
Oh, you're going to scare people from doing breathwork.
Well, from here I am, like 30 years
Right.
later. I jumped tracks. My dad was a psychiatrist. My degree's in psychology. I was on a track to get a PhD. And after that first session, I knew. And jumped tracks, never went for the PhD, and no regrets. I've done this for, over 30 years all over the world.
So is it my imagination, just because I'm getting involved in it recently, so I think everyone else is, or has something changed significantly in the last 5 or so years?
For sure.
So what do you think?
In terms of people knowing about it, for sure.
Yeah.
Something shifted.
What do you think that is? What do you?
I think it was following the same kind of trajectory as yoga did and meditation.
Kind of gradually, then suddenly.
Yeah, I think it probably hit a critical mass or something. But yeah, I don't know that there was exactly one thing. But I agree with you. There's, like, now, most everybody talks about
Right.
breathwork. When I started doing it, and people would ask me, like I could see the curtain falling behind the eyes. Like what? I don't know that I want to be talking to this weird guy.
I know it's funny that it's so strange, but it's just breathing.
And I think that's what people have a hard time with. It is so simple, so accessible, and so powerful, and so transformative.
So how would you explain it to someone who's listening to this, has heard this term breathwork? Obviously, you and I are breathing now, but that's not what we mean by breathwork. So how would you explain what it is and what it does?
Well, first we should probably say that breathwork is a kind of an umbrella term. So a lot of different types of breathing techniques, breathing practices. Anybody who's ever gone to yoga has done breathwork. There's pranayama, there's breathing for relaxation, for stress reduction. There's others that are more like for focus and energizing yourself. The one that we're talking about is kind of breathwork on steroids. Like, it's really, really powerful. You do it not only because of the length of time, an hour and a half, but it's like, I have yet 33 years later to come across anything that heals as quickly, as powerfully, and as in so many levels as that, including, with all due respect, all the medicine work,
Including psychedelics.
Yeah, which I totally honor and bow to. And with the right context, one of my concerns about psychedelics is that a lot of people doing it without a context, without information, so they had this incredible mind-expanding experience, and then they don't know what to do with it. So they have a difficult time reintegrating that, re-entering their day-to-day life.
And you don't find that with breathwork?
I think breathwork is a lot more. In all 33 years, thousands of people that I've offered it to, I only know of one person who spun out, not spun out, but she went so wild, so like had such a unitary experience, like people often do with medicine work, that she had a hard time getting back into her day to day. It's gentler, it's more natural, in a way. I mean, all we're doing is breathing. And I mean, and I'm not in any way knocking medicine work. It's like I really
Right.
do honor it, and I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for my experiences with that. Breathwork to me is just more accessible. A lot of people are never going to do medicine work because of the legality, or they just feel like they're scared of it. This is just breathing, and yet you can access some of the same states of being that you can with medicine, just using your breath.
Right. Some of the things I wonder with myself is that my first couple medicine experiences happened just before our breathwork. And I had a breathwork therapist for a couple of years who I worked with, but he was trained, I don't know if you know Dan Brule.
I do know.
So he was trained by him, and most of the things we did together were shorter, 5 or 10 minutes of breathing. Oftentimes, before sitting down in a coaching session, he'd say, "Okay, I see you're carrying a lot of stuff. Let's do this for the next 10 minutes," and then we'd have the session. And we did a couple of longer experiences, but I didn't have that kind of psychedelic experience. And what I've wondered is, did the psychedelic experiences unlock something that allowed me to have that experience with you, or would I have had it anyway? You don't know. Right.
I mean, I don't know. I can't answer that, but I can tell you that it could be either way. It could be a both and. And I can tell you a lot of people who have never had a medicine experience can get to the same places just using the breath.
When you, like the first experience I went to, say you have 30 or 35 people there, I'm sure a fair number of them are newcomers. Do you see after an experience that some of them haven't had that transformational experience? Is there some percentage of that? It happens with medicine too, by the way, where some people
that's a good question. I don't, because I've done so many and I don't always have follow-up with them. Like the ones, there's some number of them. Some of them come one time and then they never come again.
Right.
And even though I can see they had a profound experience, sometimes it scares them.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, who knows what they do? Sometimes they got what they came for, and they don't want to do it again. They don't feel they need to do it. Sometimes they'll do a retreat 5 years later, 10 years later. But I haven't studied follow-up and who or when, what kind of, haven't tried any study of what kind of experience they have with whether they come back. Sometimes I have people have that more subtle initial experiences initially, and then they come regularly.
So when you say subtle, what do you mean by that? How would they describe their experience?
Well, it's different every time you do it, and it's different from person to person. Sometimes it's more subtle, meaning, physical sensations. You might have a little bit of emotions. That would be more on the subtle end of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum, I call it cosmic fireworks. You become one with everything, one with the cosmos, one with creation. You have ancestors, loved ones who've passed, or loved ones who no longer live in this realm, who show up with.
That's what happened to me the first time with you.
Really?
Yeah, and it was weird. It was interesting afterwards because during it I felt like I was having a conversation with my grandmother.
A lot of people do that.
She had passed maybe 25 years ago. I was very close with her as a child, and we had an interaction, right? Like 3 or 4 things that I felt we said back and forth. And then afterwards, I noticed that it was a day before, a day after her, the anniversary of her passing, which was interesting. So
I love that.
It was definitely trippy.
It's amazing. I mean, just a couple of days ago, on Sunday, I had a session with a woman, probably in her 60s, early 60s. And her initial trauma with the relationship with her mom, and her mom passed, some 3-4 years ago, but she had never felt loved by her mom. She had a good that kind of level experience with her father, but in the session, and I could feel, I didn't know who was there, but I could feel something was going on. I was like, little hairs stood on my arms. And she said that her mom came and she felt her, and her mom did this. Oh, I actually did that, but she knew that it was her mom. It was right when her mother showed up, like if she could smell, like feel her presence, and I happened to do that, like
Right.
at that moment, and she like started crying because for the first time she felt her mom's love.
That's neat.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like I had another woman a couple of years ago, 83. Her, like we do a share like at the end of the group, just I want to make sure
First
that
timer?
First timer
83.
and only
Amazing.
timer.
Wow.
And her share at the end was, it has taken me 83 years to know that my daddy loved me.
Wow.
Like just from breathing, how that works.
You still don't know.
I mean, we can talk a lot about it, but I think ultimately they haven't studied breathwork in the same way they've studied meditation. A lot of research on meditation, what happens in the brain, what happens in the body. Some of it it's applicable, but they're just not beginning to study breathwork. So the way that I understand it, the way that I relate to it is more from a spiritual, psycho-spiritual.
Go for it. Yeah. And the way you understand it.
Yeah, when we think about it, in most spiritual traditions, in most religions in the world, and even several secular languages, the same word, one word, can mean breath or spirit. And so to me, that's the ultimate explanation. It's because people that even don't consider themselves spiritual report profound spiritual experiences. So we have divine visitations that are reported frequently.
And how about this specific modality? Meaning there's a lot of different kind of breathing, like you mentioned. It sounds like what you're saying is that through breathing, you can access your spirit.
Your spirit or the spirit, whatever it is, spirit.
Right. Okay. Through
the breath.
So what is it about the modality that you practice, the transformational type, the hour and a half experiences that allow for this? Is there something physiologically that's going on then that can explain this?
I don't know the physiological. They haven't really studied the physiological stuff. One of the theories about why breathwork works is that we have DMT, produced endogenously by the pineal gland, and when we breathe in this way for a certain period of time, it's released. But that can't be really studied because they would have to kill us to measure the DMT in the pineal gland. Which I think is only released when you're born and when you die or something.
Those are the highest concentrations.
The highest concentrations, yeah. So, but it's so often that things happen that are just, like I used to say, like people would ask me, am I making this up? I used to think, am I making this up? And then I got to the point where I said, like, who cares? Like we could argue that all of this, like this is all illusion, right? So then if it's all made up, then why not? Why not add meaning where I want to add meaning? And there were certain experiences along the way that are just undeniable. Like, for example, like a few years ago, this woman had some kind of a falling out with her grandmother, who was actually her mother figure who had raised her, and it had been years since they had communication. In a breathwork session, I think this was a weekend retreat, so the last of the 4 breathwork sessions, she got to a place of forgiveness. That was on Sunday. On Monday, the grandmother called. Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
And we can talk about how we're all interconnected. We can talk about all kind of that stuff, but I don't know that at least our science isn't advanced enough yet to help us understand how that works.
Right. I think that, even the questions around it come from a place of doubting spirituality. Very real way. But for those who don't, and I think a lot of the listeners here are at least curious or open enough to not be hardcore doubters. Yeah, there is. You hear stuff like this all the time. I've had certainly medicine experiences that things happen in the real world afterwards that inexplicable.
Inexplicable.
A friend of mine.
And by the way, you don't have to believe in anything for this to work.
Right, that's true.
It's not
right. It's just.
Like the mind could be saying, I hate this and this guy's crazy and I'm never going to do it again. And it still works. As long as you're breathing, it's going to work.
Right.
That's the beauty of it. It bypasses the mind.
I had a friend who told me it was a medicine experience, but still just the link between real world and not, where he was going through some process. I don't remember the specifics, but around some stuff with his mom. And he said when he came out of the experience, he had 5 missed calls from his mom. And he said she never calls him. Like absolutely never calls him. He's in his 40s today. And he called her afterwards, and he said, "Well, like, what was going on?" She said, "I don't know. Just this feeling overcame me, and I missed you." Which is like, for him, it was his first medicine experience, and it blew his whole world open. That there was this process that's going on with his
Yeah.
mom, and experiencing that. But again, it doesn't. No one has to believe it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be real or not.
As long as it works.
Yeah.
As long as it's having good effects, like who cares?
Right. What I've found certainly is I've come in times carrying just a lot of intensity, a lot of stress, a lot of worry, and all of that is gone by the end of it. It's
To me, that's the minimum that happens.
right.
The minimum that's like your baseline result. Deeply relaxed. You feel like you just lighter, more optimistic, clearer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I struggle with is that there are not enough people who practice this. Like, to me, I don't know why so many therapists exist. No offense to therapists, but the experiences I've had on breathwork, I wonder why most therapists aren't just saying, okay, we're going to turn this session into 30 minutes of breathing and 30 minutes of talking.
I know. That's why I jumped tracks and never went for the PhD. And here's why. And with all due respect to therapy, I came out of the psychotherapy world. And in the right hands, with clear goals, it can be incredibly supportive. And we all know that you can sit on somebody's couch or their office for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, rehashing the same old crap, and nothing happens. The reason for that, and certainly understanding up in the mind what happened to us when we were 5 or 10 or 15 is better than not understanding it, not knowing it at all. But the thing is that the trauma no longer lives here. It's been somaticized. It now lives in the body, so no amount of talking about it is going to get to it. And so that's where, to me, I have a lot of therapists who send people to me when they get, when they plateau in therapy, when they get a little stuck, they'll refer to me for a session or two, or we can retreat, and it's like
Right.
It really speeds up, catalyzes their therapy.
Yeah.
That's the ideal combination.
Right. That's and that's exactly what this coach that I worked with for a while, that was his process, and I found it super effective. There was almost no session that started without a few minutes of breathing.
Yeah.
And if I was carrying more, then it may be 20 or 30 minutes before we end up talking. Because what is there to talk about when I'm still like,
And
all I'm doing is describing the nonamen.
Exactly. That's what my private sessions are. They're long, but they're worth it. I have people tell me, that was like 5 years of therapy, because we do coaching for an hour and a half maybe, and then we breathe for about the same time, and they're amazing. So
Right.
that combination to me is what's ideal.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the like the ceremony and the integration.
Yes, exactly. So that you understand, you connect the dots as to what happened when we're 5. And then when you have the actual healing at a cellular level, the trauma that lives in the body gets cleared, that's the most powerful.
But I still don't have enough names of people who do this that compared to the amount of people who reach out to me that want this. Like, for example, you live in Ecuador now, right?
I'm kind of in between.
Ecuador, Miami.
Ecuador, Miami, Northern California, and now Colombia.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've sent a few people your way, but nowhere near the number of people in any one city that, like, I feel like, I would want to have 5 or 10 breathwork therapists in every city that I know of. So when people reach out to me, it's like, hey, start here.
I know. This morning I just got an email from somebody in New York. Hey, do you know anybody there? So I don't know if I have 2-3 people in New York, New Jersey who train with me. So now I've got to go see, hey, are you seeing clients? I'll have to do that when I get home. Yeah, because a lot of people stopped doing it during the pandemic, because even though it's what we most needed to be doing, we couldn't be breathing together in the same room in a powerful way.
Right, of all the things.
Yeah.
But a lot of people moved to virtual and did some of those.
Yeah.
You do some virtual sessions.
I do it very selectively.
Right, for someone you worked with.
People that I worked with, people refer by a therapist so that I know they have support.
Right.
It's powerful. It's not like when people tell me in a group, oh, can I do this with my friends? I said, no, I wouldn't recommend it. You never know what's underneath somebody's psyche, and that might be triggered. I've had people I've had to handle intense stuff, like people, with having suicidal thoughts, people trying to bolt out, and rip off all their clothes and try to run out. In person, I can handle it. I know how to handle that. In a group, virtually, click,
Right.
there's nothing I can do.
Right, that's true.
So, like, I do a year-long coaching program. About the second quarter, once I get a sense of who's in it and what kind of stuff they're dealing with, then we'll introduce virtual.
Virtual breathwork.
Yeah.
Understood.
But not initially.
But in person, you're fully comfortable with anyone.
Oh my God, yeah, no problem.
Got it. So there's no one you would say that breathwork is not for them, no psyches that are too sensitive that should worry about it.
I've never had a problem.
Right. Because when it comes to medicine, for example, there are a number of people who say if there's schizophrenia in the family, I don't even think they know Western medicine really knows where the risks are with this, but there's a number of people who they say, hey, keep them away from. Like from any of the trials, for example, that are going on, like they're the outside breathwork, as far as you're concerned.
As far as I'm concerned, I trust the breath. I trust the breath.
As long as you're there.
And I figure that if it's not for them, they'll be blocked. They won't make it.
Meaning?
Like something, like I've had people, I mean, and most of the time I know it's fear, right? They'll sign up for a weekend retreat and they have that initial yes. Like they feel the potential of healing and freedom. And yet on the day of, missed flights, minor car accidents, flu, cold or something, like psychologically, they're like sabotage the experience.
Understood, yeah.
So I think that's what it is most of the time. And then I'm open to the possibility that it's, it wasn't really for them at this point in their life. So I don't know. I don't need to know. I trust.
But in terms of screening, there isn't much screening that you'll do for a breathwork. Hey, 30 people sign up, you all come. I don't have to know what physical or mental issues someone's dealing with. Trust the breath. Yeah.
The only thing that I do talk about in a group is if you have a heart condition, make sure you're on your meds. Because you're going to be breathing powerfully, the heart's going to be working hard.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found super cool about it is that you can, unlike psychedelics where you're on the train once you take it and it's going to let you off when it lets you off. Over here, it's like, okay, it's intense. It's like, okay, that's where you're at. And then just chill for the rest of it. And 5 minutes later, if I want to pick it back up, I'll pick back up the breathing.
Exactly. It's like kind of that paradox or that both and, that it's surrendering to the breath and letting the breath guide you, and you can also guide your experience. So that if you had a peak and then you start plateauing, you want to go for more fireworks, speed up your breath. Like go for it again, and then you can have multiple peaks in one session.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah,
pretty cool experience. If someone is looking for a breathwork coach, this kind of breathwork, what would you? Are there things to look for or not look for?
There isn't a real certification process. Like I certify people who study with me, but there's no like global or even national certification as there is like for yoga.
Do you know how many people you certified?
I haven't counted recently, but I would say 40, 50.
So even that itself can be a network of people that, is there a database of all of them somewhere that?
I haven't published a database, no. And not all of them are practicing.
Right.
Like a lot of them, I think, looking back on it, they did it for their own transformational.
Right. And sometimes just, like I've thought a few times of going through the process, and probably if I wasn't married with a few kids, I would have done that at some point. Just, hey, let me take a weekend or longer to go through the process of certification and everything that entails afterwards. But never to do it, just to know it. Meaning never to be a coach. But even if maybe half of those are practicing and they're actually looking for clients, just knowing that, hey, this is someone who's been certified in some way, that can be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'll put it on my to-do list.
Yeah, and then you charge a small commission for any referrals.
There you go.
It's a win-win-win.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, and share that commission with me so we can pay for these microphones.
Nice setup, by the way.
We have
sweet setup.
Thank you. Thank you. Tyler's the brains behind it. The heart behind it is Ryan, for sure, who's not here. Tyler's the brains behind it. Mm-hmm. I just think I'd love to just kind of publish that, because I talk about these concepts all the time, and then I'll get people reaching out, hey, who can I do medicine with, or who can I do breath work with? Do you know someone in LA? I'm like, no, not really. And then for one person recently, I just Googled it, breathwork in LA, and I said, I don't know, but here's this, it's some group happening. They signed up. They said they had a great experience, which is like, okay, awesome. That's cool. So maybe back to that question of what would someone be looking for, maybe certain words or certain formats or certain anything. What someone's looking for.
I mean,
this.
for one thing, they can reach out to me, right? And
Okay.
I'm happy if I know somebody in a certain area. I'm always referring people to.
And the way to reach you is?
Probably the best way is my website, soulfulpower.com.
Soulful Power.
SOULFULPOWER.com. From there, they can get my social media, but just have them send me an email, and I'm happy to refer people.
Right. And in terms of recommendation, I mean, I've worked with you a few times, both in groups and private, and referred a number of people and have only heard amazing things. So
thank you.
So if you're in one of those spaces, that's someone who does want to work.
Yeah.
Right there. Comes with my recommendation, for sure.
Yeah. And then I'm also starting live retreats again. And so the retreats, are different locations, different parts of the world. So they can come to that for a weekend.
Right.
One of the things I love about the weekend retreats is that you do 4 breathwork sessions back to back. And when you do them like that, back to back in a designed space, in a dedicated space for that, it kind of intensifies. Sort of a like compound interest.
Right.
They build on each other.
Yeah. Right. It's not 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It's like 2 to 4 to 8 to
You keep
16.
going deep, peeling like the layers of the onion, going deeper and deeper and deeper.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like with hurricanes, they say, so say you have an 80-mile-an-hour hurricane versus a 160-mile-an-hour hurricane. It's not twice as powerful because you have all the sides of it. Right. So you think of the hurricane. So it's not just, if something going straight, okay, it's twice as powerful. But if something's doing this,
interesting.
So you're getting hit by it, right? I mean, how many? I don't know. Is it 4x?
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You'd think I'd know that, being from the tropics, and being from the Caribbean and Miami.
So who I heard this from is I had dinner years ago I was part of this business group, and this was couples, and one of the women in the group, her husband was part of the National Hurricane Center in Florida, and he was talking about that. And I was like, yeah, it actually makes once you hear it, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
but it's not
does.
A hurricane that's 160 miles an hour. It's not twice as powerful. It's many more times because it's a lot of winds coming together, and all of those are twice as powerful.
I'm going to ask him what that
number
is.
See, maybe I'm wrong on this, but this is the way he described it. He had good technical terms.
No, it makes total sense
to describe it. So it's kind of the same thing. It's not twice as powerful 2 breathworks. It's like you're compounding
exponentially.
Right.
I don't know what the number is
going.
either.
So that's what you do a weekend retreat in 4.
4, yeah. So we start Thursday night. We do the first one then, Friday, Saturday, and then the last one on Sunday. And
so you're doing one a day, pretty much.
One a day, yeah. Yeah, because of the integration thing that we're talking about. That we need time for integration.
Got it. Do you have one on the calendar that's coming up?
No. I just started. I just did the first one. I've done 2 actually. I did one in Ecuador, like a 10-day experience in Ecuador. We went to the Galapagos and did this amazing
10-day breathwork experience.
Yeah.
How many breathworks in that?
We probably did 4.
Got it.
Because we're also moving, sort of like if a vacation and a retreat got married and had a child. So it's a little bit of both, like a vacation with intention. And we stayed in some beautiful, exquisite places and had some amazing experience. We did a sweat lodge, the South American version of it.
I just did one recently for the first time. Wow.
Here in South Florida?
No, I did it in Costa Rica. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I didn't.
They're amazing.
They're amazing.
Yeah.
So you led one of those, or
no, I wouldn't. I'm not qualified to lead one, but no, I work with a shaman. I usually work with local shamans wherever. Like when we retreat in Hawaii, I work with the kahuna. I have a kahuna on different islands.
So can we talk about sweat lodges for a minute? Because it's my first experience. It was unreal. I wondered if it's like the maybe we should describe it for. Well, so it's basically a steam room. I mean. Like a 4-hour steam room.
Like in an igloo.
Right. You're kind of on, for me, there were probably 12 people in it, and it barely fit the 12 of us.
Yeah.
So you have the fire in the middle, and every 30 or so minutes or 40 minutes, they're bringing more rocks, so it's getting harder, pouring water on it, and you're in this closed igloo where, I don't know, maybe it's 3 feet high or so.
I think it's
I
probably a
guess.
little bit more. Well, it
More.
depends. If you're out towards the edges, you're almost touching that.
Right. At the
Yeah.
top, and then
In
maybe
the center, it's probably there's, I don't know, 2-3 feet. I don't know.
Oh, it's you definitely can't stand
No.
in it. So it kind of
You
has
definitely
this.
can't stand.
The only thing was when you've done it, was it very dark in yours?
Pitch black.
Okay, so that's the only thing that from other people I experienced. It was because it was sunny outside, so some light came in, even though it was completely covered,
Yeah.
but it didn't have that pitch black.
Yeah.
That pitch black, which maybe different traditions do it differently. The group that I did it with is the Lakota tradition.
I've done Lakota in South Dakota. I've done in New Mexico. I've done the Temazcal in South America.
Right. So this, I think mine was probably about 3 hours you're in there for or so. I don't know exactly.
They vary. No,
Yeah.
I think sometimes they go longer, and they have
Right. I
different
guess everyone could.
stones.
Yeah. In ours, the practitioner was much older, and I kind of felt like because of her age, she had to take her foot off the pedal, and I probably got it initiated in a lighter kind of ceremony. But it felt to me like the place where I ended up in, that with many medicines and probably breathwork, almost everything, people's ego can fight. I do not know if the ego can survive this, because at the end of the day, by us, everyone had their head on the ground. You're covered in sweat and dirt, and your face is for a good part of it 6 inches off the ground. I mean, there's no.
You've
There's
been
no
trying
ego
to get
left.
away from the heat? Like, I never had
Almost
that
everyone
experience.
had to.
Really? No, I never
Okay.
had to do that.
Yeah, I'd say our whole group was not for all of it, but anytime we needed to, right? So the earth stays cool.
Yeah.
So I was with one of the guys I was with. He's a very experienced meditator, and I saw he was doing his best to hold on as long as possible in that meditative position. And after about, I don't know, an hour and a half or 2 hours, his head was on the dirt. Because right, the way it works is by the earth, it's always cooler.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
if you need that,
heat rises. Yeah.
right? So if you need that,
Huh.
and it stays cool throughout the earth.
I've
Cool. So
never
I'd
had
say
to do
probably
that.
about 50% of the time my face was on the pavement.
So maybe she didn't take you so lightly after
Maybe
all.
she didn't, right?
Because I've never had to.
No,
do
haven't had
never
to.
had to do that.
Gotcha.
Maybe they break more frequently.
Right.
Like,
I also I volunteered to help put the rocks on it, which was much tougher than I thought.
yeah.
So by the third one, I was like, I'm gonna let someone else do this. I was sweating so much just from moving the.
Yeah.
It was like a lot of like physical work too.
Yeah, it's
So
powerful.
that
And
could
I
have
think profoundly spiritual too. Just to be in
For sure.
that
No, there's-
isolated space.
There's something going on that's way beyond what, like the four walls and they've figured something out. They've cracked some code.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
Not the four
Yeah.
walls because it's circular.
whatever, but there's something more than
The container.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, people have visions.
Right, meaning it's not just, okay, we'll put rocks in the middle, we'll sit in I don't know that I would have had nearly the same experience if I went into a sauna for 3 hours. Like there's something,
Of course.
Right, there's
Yeah,
something
there's
else.
ceremony. They're invoking the spirits. They're calling in the directions. They're singing every cycle. There's songs
and that was for sure, is that when
ritual ceremony.
when they
There's a lot of
started singing,
power.
that's when all my fears in life started coming up. When they weren't, I seemed to be okay. All of a sudden the singing would start. And
Really? I wonder why.
because I think that it's just like an ayahuasca ceremony. Those songs they're singing are not
Yes.
are
I
not
get it.
mistakes. So the period of time where, yes, it's still very warm, but they're loading the rocks in,
Yeah.
or they just loaded and it's closed. I'm like, okay, it's fine. I'm just worried about the physical sensations. And then as they would start singing the chants, suddenly it was like, I'm worried about my kids, my wife, my business, all the other,
Yeah.
kind of the pre-ceremony, not the. Like just before going in, I don't know if you have those experiences, but for me, it's like just before entering the space, whatever dimension any of these practices are bringing one into, all of my fears in life come up. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that one was.
It's the
one I
ego
had.
mind.
Yeah.
The ego mind, part of its job is to maintain the status quo. Even if the status quo is at best comfortable, at worst miserable, it doesn't care. So anything that's going to loosen its hold on things, it's going to be very scary to it. It's going to be threatened by it. So of course it makes sense that right before a big transformation, that I would try to like scare you.
All the fears come up.
Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier about growing up very religious and kind of moving away from that, and then reconnecting through this, was there a, like, as you were entering kind of the Eastern religions and the spiritual teachings and healing that comes from these practices, were there some of those old voices from childhood saying, hey, is this wrong? Is this incorrect? Does this contradict those things? Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it was a journey for sure. Because, the way that I was raised, there's only one true religion.
Right.
Right? The one only. So, of course, it was a process of dismantling that. And it was a combination of, I think, three things that really, like, took that down. So I went as far as, I thought I wanted to be a priest. I went to a Jesuit high school, and I thought I wanted to be a priest. And actually, when I had a meeting with the guy who decided who got in and who didn't, thankfully was a wise man who said, "What do you, go to college at least a couple of years, and then we'll talk."
They say rejection is God's protection.
It wasn't even a rejection, right?
It was a nice rejection. Go somewhere else and come back.
Yeah. So, but several things happened in those years in college. I took class in existentialism in college, and began a process of questioning, the Catholic worldview and the way that I had been taught to look at things. I had a phase of experimentation with mind-expanding substances, and that accelerated that process of questioning reality as I knew it. And then I fell in love, and those three things combined. Like, I'd had sex before, but I had never had that experience of sex and love, like making love. And it just, like, the Jesuits never stood a chance after that. Yeah. And so that was the main gist of it. And then there was still during my 20s.
But until going to university, you were 100% bought in. This is the one truth. This is the only truth.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The reason
probably senior year started the question. Senior year high school.
Right. The reason I ask is because it seems to me like we saw like the ego mind, like one of the last frontiers for, maybe, I don't want to say last or first, one of the most powerful tricks the ego plays to control are a lot of these childhood religious ideas that all of a sudden seem to come to the forefront in very intense ways when someone's about to get to the other side of something. And what's interesting is that for myself, this process has actually brought me much closer to my Judaism. But in going through it, I had to wrestle with all of these things that I don't think the average person would have looked at me in the life I was living and asked and imagined that those are the thoughts that would have come up as I was going into, let's say, an ayahuasca ceremony or a breathwork practice. Meaning I wasn't eating in a kosher restaurant the night before, but I'm walking into a breathwork place, and suddenly I'm looking on the wall at all the images and wondering if they're Jewish. And it's okay. And I was like, oh, I see a Hebrew letter. Like, maybe this is okay. Why do they have that one? Or I was speaking to someone recently, and I was talking to him about the power. He was struggling with sex addiction and was married with children and engaged in pornography and prostitution. And I said, maybe you should consider, if other things aren't working, he had tried 12 steps, maybe you should consider plant medicines. It's really helped me. And so, is that okay from a Jewish perspective? I think I have to check with my rabbi. I'm like, okay, just do you check with your rabbi before you go to the prostitute? I mean, like, suddenly you have something that can heal,
funny.
Right?
That is funny.
Something that can heal, and all of a sudden, all these questions come up. So I thought kind of comparing and contrasting, like, this idea from different religions would be interesting. That's why.
That is funny. Yeah, I think for me, I was already... Like, I had already had that throwing out with the baby with the bathwater thing.
Right, from those three experiences. But one of them was medicine.
Yeah.
And there were some of those ideas that you had to let go of.
Yeah.
Do you remember them, or it's too far?
I had already started to let go of some of the ideas. I always read a lot, too. So from science fiction, I was already questioning stuff. But it was that combination of, like, what really sped it up, the real catalyst was that combination of the philosophy class, which, I started learning about all these heresies and all these actual questioning of of that worldview, we weren't heresies, um, in some very logical arguments
Right.
that had validity to me, and then combined with the just reality shattering experiences I was having on the psychedelics.
And today with Catholicism and religion, have you returned in some way, or do you see it as
No, I don't consider myself anything. Like I honor all the traditions. I think they all are valid paths to the sacred. I don't think any of them are really necessary. I think one can that in fact that's one of the ways that I measure them. I also challenge them all. I said to me that to the degree that a religion, a tradition is helping us become better human beings, to really fulfilling our potential to develop that personal connection and experience of the sacred, then they're doing their job. But to the
right?
degree that they're creating separation and hatred and what I call a theological pissing contest,
Right.
my God is bigger than yours, then
Right. It's not a godly perspective.
no, it's a
Yeah.
very limited, what's the word? Anthropomorphized, like our
Right. Like
projections into the
humanizing.
sacred.
Right.
Yeah.
Our human projections
Yeah.
of God. Yeah. For me, it's kind of been this. I don't even know how to describe it because it's done both. On the one hand, I like almost the way I say it today. My process has got me to say F religion, but I've embraced God. But as part of that, I've also embraced my Judaism, but not in the way I was raised with it, but in a different. I don't know.
That's great.
Even
That's
this
beautiful.
idea, like Judaism is chosen, right? Like that idea. So those was always, it's like, oh, we're chosen. Yeah, I think it's true, and I think it's true for everyone. Like I think, like the world operates on efficiency, meaning there isn't anything extra in the human body. There isn't any. Oh, this thing does nothing. No, it's an ear. It does nothing. And the other thing that we haven't
Right.
figured out yet, it does something.
Right.
Right? We'll find out one day what it does. So it's kind of the same thing. I think that like you wouldn't want the finger to sit there, or the hand, let's say, to think like, oh, the heart is more chosen. No, like you're pretty chosen. You have a very important job, and you
Yeah.
got to do what's necessary. And the heart to feel chosen, and the shoulder to feel chosen for that job. Like, yeah, everyone is chosen. So meaning, like the way I see it today, and maybe it's heresy according to Judaism, is that it would be perfectly appropriate for every single people to tell their people that they are chosen, so that they feel responsible for their mission and whatever it is that they're doing. So this people embraced this idea, and Judaism, took on certain things back several thousand years ago, and it's okay. This is our people, and we were chosen for this, and this is what we're going to do. Like we're chosen for this.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean someone else isn't. Yeah, they were chosen for something else, and hopefully, like the way I'm looking, like we spoke about Temescal and other kind of things. There's certain traditions which sacrifice tremendously to be able to preserve these rituals and practices. It wasn't an accident that these things survived. And if you
No.
think about the wars going on in many of these countries where a few hundred people said, no, we're not giving in. We're not converting. We're not becoming part of them.
Yeah.
And then today we're going to them and say, okay, teach us some of these traditions, and whether we get the sweat lodge or certain breathing practices.
Yes.
And I think Judaism did the same thing. It's like, oh, tell us, you have the Sabbath thing? It's like, wow, what a cool tradition that you preserved for 3,000 years. Like, how amazing.
And there's something to that.
I think like Sabbath probably makes more sense now
For sure.
than at any time in human history.
Definitely.
Like the fact that certain people preserve this. It's like, hey, this idea of not working 7 days a week.
And the technology thing.
What? Meaning getting away from technology.
Get away from
Brilliant.
technology for a day.
Yeah,
that's
brilliant.
an amazing practice.
Right.
Like, how many of us can actually do that? Like, leave the phone for 24 hours.
I started doing it.
Good.
I started doing it. I had an ayahuasca experience where it helped me let go of some religious resentments that I was holding onto for family and things like that. And shortly thereafter, it showed me, it was like, you want to see this gift of the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And it brought me, and so it was all feeling, but it was lights and colors. And I was like, wow, this is so beautiful. And I think that combination of letting go of the resentments that I had around some stress that was Sabbath related, when I was a kid, plus seeing what, like, the energy of it. I was like, oh, wow, there's something beautiful. And now I had a breathwork experience a few weeks ago. And again, I connected to this energy of Sabbath and how since doing it, what it's like done for my family and how it's protected us. And it's like, wow, it's just such a cool thing to one day a week, just, hey, I'm offline.
It's amazing.
Yeah, connect.
I think we would all benefit from doing that.
Right. Right. I don't know how we got here, but
yeah.
it was right. To me, what was interesting, I know where I started it, was about so much of this religious programming, how it seeps so deep. And then as we're becoming who we need to become, these things come out in full force. And I was just interested in hearing it from a different religion. You know what I mean? Someone who, because every religion will say, oh, but ours is the truth. That's why it's so hard to let go, to let go of. But you had a hard time letting go of. I have a conversation I had a little while ago it was a couple of years ago actually now, with Omar Pinto, who's a friend of mine / coach and lives in Costa Rica. He's on the medicine path and a medicine man today. And he grew up Jehovah's Witness. So he talks about his struggle with it. And it was just interesting to compare. Do you remember more about that, or just that struggle?
Well, for me, it was existential, because part of me really wanted to serve God as I understood it then. And I think it was legitimate. I think it was a real vocation. In a way, I'm still doing that priestly role, in the ultimate sense. I don't need anybody to tell me that I do that. I know that I do that. I don't need to be ordained by anybody.
Right.
I know I do that.
Ordained by God.
But at that time that I was so conflicted, because I was told by the religion in which I was raised that I was anathema, that I was an abomination in the eyes of God because I was gay.
Right.
And so talk about conflict, like trying to reconcile these two opposite sides. And so my adolescence was one long depression with suicidal fantasies.
Oh, just wrestling with those two.
Yeah, like this part of me that wanted to, it was so loved God as I understood it then, and yet I was being told that I was going to burn in hell for eternity. And I remember being a kid, young, and I'm Cuban, so coming from an island environment, I asked a priest once, how long is eternity exactly? And using an island appropriate metaphor, he goes, well, imagine you go to the beach with a thimble and you start taking water out of the ocean. That's eternity, which of course terrified me.
Right.
Because to put things in context.
But he understood why you were asking?
No. I was just asking, hypothetically.
He wasn't trying to
asking for my friend.
He wasn't trying to make you more scared.
I don't know.
All right, got it. Okay.
I don't think so. But to put things in context, masturbation is still considered a mortal sin in Catholicism. And, we don't have to get into the whole hierarchy of sins thing, but they have your what do they call them? Venial? I think a menial sins. You're lying, you're stealing, you're cheating.
Right.
They look the other way. Slap in the, slap in the hand and do an Our Father or a Hail Mary. Then there's your whole other category of mortal sins, which means that if you die having committed a mortal sin and you haven't received absolution, forgiveness, and this can't be done directly, it has to be done through a priest. Talk about a control scam. You go to hell for eternity. And
being gay is a mortal sin?
Yeah. Masturbation is minor compared to that. That's I forget the exact punishments, but homosexuality is up there with murderers or really horrible stuff, and all from misunderstandings, from mistranslations of stuff that was written thousands of years ago, taken, translated, retranslated, mistranslated, stuff taken out, stuff put in. Stuff that was written at a time where women weren't even human. Women were property. And so stuff that, am I going to guide my sense of what's right and wrong by that? It's I'm not.
Right.
I'm not. And yet at the same time, he's I know my heart. That's what I'm going to go by.
So today you still see yourself as living a life of meaning the childhood dream Like the drive has come true. You've just kind of
Yeah.
taken out the middleman.
Yeah, I'm living on purpose. I'm
Right.
fulfilling my mission. I know. What's the Japanese word? Ikigai?
I don't know.
I don't know if I'm going to remember them all, but there's 4 things that if you can say that it's something that you're good at, something that you can make money with, something that the world needs. I'm forgetting the 4th one. But if you can
Right,
hit
hit all
those
4.
4, then you got Ikigai. And I can do all 4.
With it, right?
Yeah. I'm living my purpose. I'm good at it. People need it.
Right, feels good.
The world needs
helps
it.
others. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It doesn't hurt anyone in the process. It's
No,
just
on the contrary.
Yeah, it
On
helps.
the contrary.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how frequently I've heard you change my life.
Right.
What's better than that?
As long as you change it for the good.
Always.
That's better, yeah.
Always.
No, it's even when you say like, what did you do? Right. Oh, you just connected them with their breath, right? You didn't introduce any ideas.
Well, some of them are in retreats.
Right.
So it's a combination of helping them understand, right? Like at a cognitive level, why they do the things they do, like understanding the ego mind, understanding how to get free from the prison of the mind and all its shenanigans, it's the projection, control freak.
I mean, you're not telling them whether their job is good for them or not good for them. You'll figure that out in the breathwork.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm giving them the tools that they need to free themselves and heal themselves.
Right. And then
Like I don't take credit for the healing that happens in the breath work. Like to me, that's spirit. That's the breath. But I do take credit for bringing myself fully present and for creating a safe environment in which that person, that group can let go of whatever they need to let go of so that they get healed and cleared.
Right.
And there's a lot to be said for that.
So let's go back to that question. A lot being said for that. If someone could reach out to you, if someone could, if it happens to be in a place you're working with, or if you eventually publish a list of people who you've certified and they can go with them, great. If not, if they don't do any of those things and they're just out there, maybe they started working with a breathwork practitioner, or they joined a class, or they're interested in starting, what are the things to look for? How would someone know?
Breathwork practitioner?
Yeah. I'm looking for someone. I'm looking for this kind of breathwork stuff. I know that, for example, Wim Hof has his own breathing stuff, which seems to me, I've done it a number of times. It seems to me to be much more physical or,
it is
related.
I mean, and
I'm talking about this kind of breathwork.
And I'm thankful for his
healing.
work. He's really done a lot to get
huge
breathwork out there. But I think his approach, if you want to talk about it from a more masculine energy, it's more that is like how to use the breath to transcend the limitations of the body. Temperature, the cold dips. I think he hiked, I forget which mountain, but in shorts, like snow-covered mountain in shorts by using his breath. So there's a lot to that, right? It's a lot that's very empowering and transcending limitation to be able to do that kind of stuff.
I think even with viruses or stuff like that, like he's taking people through breathworks and he'll get injected with the virus, and it's like, we'll beat the virus.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff. It's a pretty amazing stuff. My approach, you could say, is more feminine in the sense that it's more about going within rather than than conquering the body or conquering the world. It's more about freeing yourself. So it's really courageous. Like it's no less to me. To me, it might even be more courageous because it's the willingness to go inside and to face our demons. To me, it's heroic.
Oh yeah.
And to be willing to feel stuff that in some cases we spent a lifetime running away from, self-medicating not to feel, self-medicating with drugs, alcohol, food, sex, shopping, gaming, social media, exercise, all the ways that we use to not feel and to not think and to run away from ourselves, to distract ourselves. And in breathwork, we're saying like, I'm going in there and I'm willing to see whatever comes up for the sake of my freedom. Stuff of heroes.
Right. I was speaking to someone recently who's, started on the path and, doing breath work, medicine, coaching, just whole gamut, but over the last few months. And in a conversation with me, I asked them a question. They were struggling with an ayahuasca experience, and I asked them a question about it. Like, wow, the realization for them was the recognition that the people around them that are struggling, they benefit from in some way. Like they're almost feeding that struggle by being needed, I think was the realization.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, am I really doing that? Am I really keeping the people around me sick? And so those were your words, not mine. Was literally what you said in response to a question. So if you feel that way, then yeah, it says, wow, I'm doing that. It makes me want to vomit. And I said, I was like, that's why they call this work courageous, because we all have to look at things that are really brutal to look at about ourselves.
And sometimes remember stuff that we don't want to remember.
Yeah. It's the sometimes when talking about the 12 steps, right? So step 4 deals with resentments. Step 8 and 9 deals with amends we have to make. So I said, it's kind of taking everyone through this process. First, you kind of get to be the victim, in step 4. Oh, this person hurt me and I'm upset at this person, and kind of work through that. And then we get to the other side, and it's we're the ones who hurt others, the amends we have to make. It's like, there's, and that's the harder thing to face, but they're both hard, right? Seeing where we were truly hurt and seeing where we hurt others. They're both, but it's that work that's, the healing is not, it's not a pretty process, because we often have to face things about ourselves that are hard to admit. We wished it was the whole world who had those problems. But
I think the hardest thing, like in all the stuff that in my retreats that people, face, I think the one that I've noticed is the hardest to really take on is letting go of the victim consciousness. Like, poor me, woe is me. If only my mom hadn't done that, or dad did this. If only the system was set up differently. If only there wasn't sexism or misogyny or homophobia or racism, and not to deny that people do horrible things, and not to deny and not to make it okay, and not to say that the system is set up unfairly, because it is set up unfairly. So it's not to deny any of that, but if we want to be free, we gotta go beyond that, right? If we're holding somebody or if we're blaming them for what they did or didn't do, we're giving our power away. If we're blaming the system, we're giving our power away, and we're keeping ourselves disempowered in victim mode. And it's tough. And to me, the one who best exemplifies that, Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist.
Right. Yeah.
Spent years in concentration camps. Lost everything, everyone, his pregnant wife, soulmate kind of relationship. And that man was able to say that they could take everything away from him except for one thing. The ability to choose how he would be in response to that.
Yeah, ridiculously powerful.
Ridiculous. If he can do it there, certainly we can do it in our lives. Not to minimize anybody's trauma either.
Right.
But come on.
Yeah.
Certainly we can do it.
Right. There's definitely something to tap into about that realization that he had to overcome that. What do you feel like it is that keeps people there? When you say it's the hardest thing, you see people.
It's responsibility. Taking responsibility. It's a lot easier to say, well, I can, I'm not so successful because of the way the system is, the way that I was taught, the family or the culture that I was raised in. It's a lot easier, right? And the thing is that life is going to continue throwing curveballs like that. We can count on.
Right. We'll all have a number of excuses
for sure. But once we say, all right, well, that sucked, and I'm so sorry that happened, and I wish it hadn't happened. And what are you going to do? How are you going to show up in response to that? That alone pops you out of the victim mode.
And this is the number one.
That's the one that people have the hardest time with.
So fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that and forgiveness.
But is it different?
That was just, I think in some cases, And forgiveness is kind of the same thing. I mean, there's a lot of similarities. If we're holding somebody over the fire for what they did or didn't do, our hand is also getting burnt. And so there's even like a level of, like we've been told, forgiveness is for us. And and the other thing that to remember about forgiveness is, like, if you think of the heart, and I'm not talking the organ, but the heart center, the chakra, the energy system. It opens and closes in the same way that the eye does or the camera, to allow more or less light in. In this way is to allow more or less love in. We can't close it selectively, right? To the ex who left us for somebody else or cheated on us, or to dad who wasn't there, or to the boss who fired us. We can't shut it selectively. If we shut it, we shut it. So it's not even about them. It's about
everyone
me
else.
and my heart.
Right.
It's about my heart and love.
Right. And am I open or am I closed?
Right. My heart and life, my relationship to life.
So what you're saying is not willing to forgive is keeping that shutter closed.
Yeah, that's it.
So you connected.
And by the way, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to do it in stupid ways either. Like, doesn't mean we have to go have brunch with them after we forgive them. But we have to forgive. And there's levels of forgiveness, because a lot of times I'll have people come to breathe, and they'll say, oh, no, I already worked on that. I already, did therapy on that, and I already forgave them. And then when they breathe, there's a whole other level, which is the heart level forgiveness. Like, when things forgiving up here, I forgive you, there's another level of forgiveness that happens in the heart.
Which to you is reopening that heart.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's something that resonated me recently, is there are kind of vows we make, right? So something happens to us and we say, okay, I promise never to get hurt in that way again.
That's it.
And so maybe it's maybe a different way of saying what you're saying now, where, okay, I'm going to forgive this person for what they did, but that promise that I made to never get hurt again, that promise is still being kept.
That's it. And the thing about those promises is that sometimes we made them when we're like this old.
Oh, yeah.
We were kids. Right. Had no idea about anything. I'm never going to, we're watching our parents having an argument. I'm never going to do that. Never going to do that. And sometimes they don't even remember that they made that choice. And then they wonder why the relationships don't work out. Right? Because there's like, there's a part of us that wants the relationship, so we do this, but then they start getting too close and we do that. Right?
Yeah.
So we end up sabotaging our relationships before we even get started by attracting people who are not a match, people who are not available, to live on the other side of the world, the other side of the country. They're already with somebody else. They're just not there emotionally. And so subconsciously we're sabotaging them to avoid getting hurt, or to avoid losing ourselves in another relationship. Whatever it is that we're afraid of will happen. End up in divorce, get hurt, get cheated on, all the things that we fear. But there's still that longing, so that we end up doing this approach avoidance thing. It's not a good strategy, because by sabotaging them, we end up ensuring the very same thing we're trying to avoid, which end up alone.
Right, they're guaranteed gonna.
The guarantee?
I want to pull apart the forgiveness and the victimhood thing. So when you spoke about victimhood, you said the pull there is the fear of responsibility.
Yeah.
And for forgiveness, like not willing to forgive the past, is that also not wanting to take responsibility for the future? Is there something else?
That's a really interesting question. I hadn't thought about it in that way. I'll have to think about that some more. I think the forgiveness, the forgiveness thing is, I don't want to get hurt again. So if I forgive you, and I think there's an element of being right.
Justice.
Being right. Like, if I forgive, then I'm not right anymore.
Right, exactly. Right, like justice has to be.
So I don't think it's justice. I think justice is a different thing.
Okay.
I think it's self-righteousness.
Got it.
Like, I'm right and you're wrong.
Oh, and if I don't...
Yeah. And if I forgive, then I don't get to be right anymore. And that's kind of twisted. But it is one of the functions of the ego, which is that being right. It's a really strong need in human beings.
Right. I had a business transaction I once did with someone, and I felt like they didn't keep their word. And because of that, it caused all of these consequences. And at one time during healing this resentment and everything else, I looked at it in a different way. And what I said was, hey, this process, let's say, went on for a year, where the word was not kept. And as a result, I had these consequences. So I said, well, if I'm being honest about this, the word wasn't kept for one day. And I knew after that one day that they were someone who didn't keep their word the way I wanted them to. So if I'm looking at this 365-day period where all of these things fell apart, I'm responsible for 364. They're responsible for one. Because on the first day, I had no way of knowing that they weren't going to keep their word. But the second day, I should have known, because they didn't on the first day. Right. And this helped me release a lot of it. I said, okay, I'm responsible for 364 days. They're
That's right.
responsible for one. They don't get to use the same calculation when they have to do their,
That's right.
but also I was working with my perspective of the situation, meaning even with my rigid perspective of the situation where I was right and they were wrong, I was still responsible for 364 days and they were responsible for one, even within
and
that.
And that goes back to the personal accountability, right? Because what we do with that is like, well, bad them, poor me, bad person, out of integrity, right? We point the finger. Ego's great at that. But if we get really honest and we look at that, we overrode our intuition. At which point did we override that first yellow flag?
Right, exactly.
And then the second one, and then the red flag. And we kept overriding them.
Right. So what was pulling us there? Right.
So and that's tough. Like owning responsibility, it's tough. It's really hard.
You mentioned before, like the many different hates people assume exist. I'm kind of sensitive to that because, like growing up, I felt like way too many Jews went there with anti-Semitism. Like sometimes bad things happen to everyone. Sometimes bad things happen to Jews. And it's not necessarily anti-Semitism. It can just be whatever. I don't know. The teller wasn't that nice. I have no idea that it wasn't necessarily about it being a Jew on the other side. My connection to that is I saw a study recently. I saw someone talk about the study. I didn't read the study, so it could be made up, but put it out there. It was interesting in any case. Was they took a number of women who they drew kind of scars on their face. And they said, okay, you're going to be going in for interviews. And they showed them in a mirror what it looked like with various scars. And then just before they were walking in, they said, oh, one sec, let's just touch this up. And they wiped off all the scars from their face, but they didn't know. So while they thought it was being touched up, everything was being moved. So they walked in with their regular face. And all or most of them reported discrimination for their physical appearance.
Wow.
Afterwards. So I should dive into this. I saw it like quick, someone talking about it, but it is kind of fascinating the way.
It is fascinating.
Like, meaning even if that study isn't true, the concept is something that I think feels true to me when I watch people's healing process.
Yeah.
That we're able to let go of a lot of things.
Yeah.
That
yes.
we're sure the other person is at fault for. I liked what you said a lot about overriding the intuition. Like that's something we can all take responsibility for.
Oh my God, yeah, all of us. We've done it 1,000 times.
Right.
And I don't think we can deny that there's anti-Semitism.
Of course it exists, right.
And so you're pointing to something else which I think is really valid too, is the mindset that we bring to any human interaction has an impact on it.
Right.
Whether we wake up cranky or how we approach that meeting is going to have whether we're cranky or in a great blissful place is going to have an impact on that kind of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there are times I've experienced anti-Semitism, but the way I knew was, one event that comes to mind, I was walking in England with a few friends, and before we were attacked, the guy said, "You effing Jews." So I'm like, "Oh, he's probably an anti-Semite, right?" That was what tipped me off.
That's a good clue.
Right. But had he not said that, it could have been any number of things. It could have been wanting money or something else. So that's all I'm saying, is that the knee jerk to go there is like, "Oh, that's for sure what happened," is, we're in truth, we're all minorities. Like we all are in a different way. We're all one. We're all a minority in some way. Yeah. And we're walking in, and there's this person hates that person who hates that. There are these stuff, but it's not actually a unique experience. It's the most common experience. Yeah. Trauma is, who doesn't have trauma? It's the most common experience. For a while, I walked around like I was sexually abused as a child. Okay, so were many people.
Me too.
So were many, many people. Way too high, the numbers, way too high, and many have come to the other side of that. Are you comfortable talking about that? Because I feel like with that, there's a lot of people who feel like it's one and done. They were sexually abused and their life is over.
God, no. I have worked with so many people, so many. And the numbers are pretty crazy. I think it's 1 out of 4 women, 1 out of 6 men. Right.
Depending on how you define it, there can be a lot. If you start talking about verbal things, one of the ways I look at it is not was someone sexually abused, but was someone's sexuality abused? Yeah. And then the numbers are astronomical, because you talk about the purity of a child and them being introduced to sex in either violent ways like I was, or just being introduced at all. Maybe, I had a friend from recovery whose father was convinced at 5 or 6 years old that he was going to be gay, and he would turn on porn in front of him, hoping he would get him excited by regular pornography.
Like he likes straight
right,
porn.
straight porn. Hope he eventually did become or was gay or whatever. He is gay today. As a child, his father was concerned that this may happen.
Right.
And what he did was, the irony is, he put straight porn on in front of him,
right.
and taught him to masturbate. Right.
Sexualized him at an early age.
Right, at this age. So whatever. I mean, the whole thing is insane. He was struggling. I remember when he was in our group, for sex addiction recovery, and he was struggling seeing this as an abusive interaction because his father was trying to educate him and teach him. So he saw it in that context, not there was an adult who was masturbating me or was masturbating in front of me. Like it took him a few people telling, like, dude, that's like straight sexual, right? Sexual abuse. My point is that interaction is very sexually abusive, meaning when you say his sexuality was abused, how was he introduced to sex?
That's a great way of putting it.
So the numbers are astronomical when you, especially in today's day and age where so much of our culture is.
I see it all the time. And I can see it in the body sometimes before the person even remembers.
So say more about that.
Well, like one of my favorite success stories is this woman, like probably her 50s when she came to me, really successful. Like she was vice president of a global multinational and like vice president that really meant something, not just like every other person's a vice president in a company, like in the banks.
Like not a 3-person company.
Right.
I own a bank every
But she was like in charge of global blah, blah, blah. I forget what she did. But she had never had a successful relationship. And so she started coming to me for breathwork for retreats. And boy, did she fight. She fought that probably more than anybody who's ever come to me. She fought going deep into the breathwork.
What does that look like, fighting in breathwork?
Like not breathing.
Yeah.
And then, do all my tricks to get her to breathe. All the things that I do to bring them back and breathe. And like she would literally consciously not breathe. Until I said to her, look, I'm not going to fight you. If you don't want to breathe, don't breathe. And so that's when she really started breathing, but started having memories. And it started putting dots together. Like the human mind is so amazing. She realized that where the abuse had happened, and it was her pediatrician, she had moved back into the town of her childhood, and she was literally down the street, 2 blocks away from where it happened originally.
This retreat. No,
I mean, that's like after several retreats, she realized that this thing, that she was living right down the street, like she connected the thing. And like after multiple retreats, I can't remember how many, maybe 4 or 5. But in the very last session, she had like the final breakthrough where she saw herself in this closed room, and she thought that she was being kept in the room until she realized that she was the one. Because there was who was keeping herself trapped and from keeping her from leaving the room, because in a sense she was getting what her payoff was. She had gotten a lot of attention, like she felt really special from the pediatrician. So that's what she had to give up, that specialness from a child. She was like a little kid. So,
but she had to give that up today.
No, she had to give it up today, right, in order to free herself.
Like still wanting that specialness and attention?
Yeah, I mean, but filtered through the mind of a child that didn't know any better. So, and not even aware of what she was doing, or not even aware of the whole special thing until we processed it after the fact. And so that was on a Sunday. On Tuesday, she's having lunch with a friend that she had lunch with regularly. And the woman goes, oh, I don't know why I hadn't thought about this before, but you need to meet my friend so-and-so. They had lunch within 2 weeks. Long story short, I married them.
Wow.
I like the relationship of her dream, like an enviable relationship. Amazing. So when I do my retreats on relationships, it's kind of paraphrasing one of the themes is paraphrasing the Course in Miracles, that it's not our job to look for love, but to look within ourselves for the obstacles to love, the ways that we're keeping love at bay, the ways that we're afraid of it. And so that we end up doing this. And in her case, it's like we can understand why. She didn't want to trust. We understand, it's understandable. It's not rocket science. But when she cleared that and healed that, then
And the
she
heart
became,
did what the heart
she became
does.
available.
Right.
And love came and knocked her upside the head.
Right. I like that phrasing more than just love, but a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Sun or job to look for, right? What are the obstacles to
Within
it?
here.
Right.
Yeah. How are we keeping it away? How are we
Right.
blocking it?
Right. Love and many other things. But I guess on some level you can say everything is love, right? The healing is love.
Yeah. 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 And that's why we end up sabotaging our relationships. Because we're subconsciously, we're afraid that something bad's going to happen. We're going to get hurt. We're going to be left. We're going to be cheated on. We're going to lose myself, all etc. And so we end up attracting the wrong people and end up sabotaging them. But it's not a good strategy. It's hard work. It's heroic work, but it is so worthwhile to dive within and to clear the obstacles.
Right. I think that, one of the differences between the way you're talking about these problems and the way you're able to address it, therapy doesn't even give like the therapeutic modalities don't really offer a therapist this track, even if they wanted to. In many cases, they're kind of left to alleviate just the most pressing symptoms in the way the patient chooses. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so.
So there's
for me, the other thing that was missing, and I know that there's some schools that correct that now, but it was leaving the whole spiritual side out of it.
Yes, exactly. That's what they're forced to do, is take the spiritual side off the table. That somehow this wasn't meant to happen to you. Somehow this was like you're on the wrong path.
And to me, that's like, how can you leave? Like, that's as ridiculous as me trying to leave my sexuality out of my life by trying to be a priest.
Right.
Because in those days, I naively thought that priests were celibate. So it was a way that I could sublimate my sexuality and not have to deal with it.
You thought they weren't just saying it, they actually were.
I thought they actually were. And so that was a way for me. I mean, subconsciously, I wasn't doing this consciously then. But looking back on it is like, I know that was part of it. I think part of it was a real vocation. But I think part of it, too, is a way that I didn't have to deal with sexuality. And I know that's why a lot of priests get into the priesthood, too.
Right. Can I just shelf this? That's probably the first thing that medicine worked on for me. Like these whole modalities was, I was in 12 steps for a long time. And my approach to dealing with sexuality and what I just put it on a shelf and said, I can't touch it. I put a box around my sexuality, danger.
Right.
Don't go there.
Right.
Every once in a while we need to touch it just to make a baby, but other than that, no. And medicine changed that completely.
Good.
For me, completely changed. It allowed me to
part of being human. Sexuality, spirituality, we can't deny.
Right.
Whole parts of being human.
Yeah, 100%. So you're saying in terms of healing that people take spirituality off the table from healing, and it's like, how can you? Yeah. That's what when the 12 steps started. So Carl Jung was having dialogue with I think it was Bill Wilson, one of the founders, and he phrased it this way, where he said he's seen certain people who are alcoholics of the type that only spirituality can, like only a complete spiritual awakening or spiritual transformation could heal them. But in a lot of ways, it's for all of us. The only way healing can come in is through spirituality. And so much of therapy has to put that on the table and pretend that doesn't exist. Only if, I know with several therapists, and I saw it being on the other end of it. I had a therapist who was a religious man who never once spoke about God unless I went there first.
Right.
But he would never introduce that worldview.
Neither would I. Like, I would never introduce.
But you're still introducing spirituality in terms of, if you're saying like this victimhood kind of approach, like real forgiveness and letting go. I found when I was in therapy, therapists couldn't, like if I was feeling bad about my abuse, they just had to make me feel a little better about that.
Or give you medication, worse yet, to not feel.
Yes, one of the things, I don't know where it came from, but every single time I was in therapy, and therapist, I did probably 3 or 4 times, was, hey, why don't you consider, for this anxiety or for the, sexual addiction, maybe you can take this and it can help with that. And I had crazy anxiety. I'm like, no, anything else. You can give me 50 things to do before that. I do not want medication.
So. And I'm not denying 100%, that like antidepressants, that for some people there probably is a brain biochemistry thing, and that for some people it may be helpful. And I would don't know what the number is, but I think we know that by far the majority of people that are depressed and antidepressants, if they came to breathe and they actually,
Right.
rather than try to numb it out and not feel it, but actually dove into it and dealt with it, that it would clear it permanently.
Right.
And I'm not saying, get off your meds, like have that conversation with your doctor, but explore. Because the problem with the antidepressants too is that it just numbs out all emotions.
Well, I've seen it recently. I can think of one example of a gentleman who he did go through a very, very, very significant life experience, very significant. And most likely it was very necessary for a period of time because of what had happened, meaning he was, lived for decades on the planet without needing it. Something specific happened. His doctor recommended it, but now it was several years later and he was still on it. He went off of it and started engaging in these kind of practices between breathwork and psychedelic medicines. And last I heard, it's been months and months and months. He's not back on it. So there's definitely many. I don't know if it was. First of all, I've done that route, right? Is stay away from medication, even though it's recommended, and try other ways. But certainly, if I still felt the way I felt when I was in that therapy office, now I would try. I wasn't going to stay feeling like that forever.
I mean, just I'm gonna again, don't get off your meds on your own. Like, do it with a trained professional.
But try some breathing.
Yeah, try breath. Like, introduce other modalities and don't numb it out.
Does that stop it? Meaning, if someone is on antidepressants and they do a breathwork session, do you find that
they tend to have a more surface
muted
experience? Muted. That's a good word. Because the thing about that, what used to be, here's why numbing it out doesn't work. And the reason that I think therapy can fall short is because what used to be spiritual teaching, that everything is energy, now we know from quantum physics, everything is energy. The chair, the mic, the body, the emotions, everything is energy, even though it might feel solid. We're vibration. Energy cannot be destroyed. We also know from physics. So all those traumas from the past, right? All the stuff that are unavoidable, the process of birth, loss of loved ones, accidents, loss of a pet. Those are all traumatic. And
traumatic in the sense that they still live within us.
They become energy. They're energy.
Stored.
And all the thousands of times that we have stuffed our emotions, right? We thought that if I really say what I'm feeling now, it's going to cause conflict. It's going to end the relationship. I'm going to end up alone. So we swallow it. We're afraid of conflict. We hate confrontation. And so, but the thing is that just because we swallow it or try to sweep it under the rug, it doesn't go away. It doesn't work. It gets stuck, and it actually festers under the rug. It only gets worse. And so it's not an effective strategy. So I would say the sooner in your life, because I saw it, I've seen it in people that if you wait till the end of your life, my mom just passed a few months ago. And I saw stuff coming out. She was starting to get dementia. And the stuff that I saw coming out of her was stuff that she hadn't resolved from adolescence.
Right.
She was bullied by, kind of a nasty girl in high school.
And that was coming up.
It was coming up at the end of her life.
Right. And a few breathing said, you never got her into it, the breathing?
She came once. Yeah. And I did a private session, and most often it's not a good idea to do it with your loved ones or your
right.
But I knew that that's the only way she would even try it, and I have a strong sense of myself, so I knew I wasn't going to use it for abuse of power or take advantage or anything like that. So, yeah, all my siblings at this point have come to breathe.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've. Yeah, I have eight siblings, so more and more they're intrigued.
Yeah.
By some listen to the podcast sometimes.
Yeah.
One of my family members said I said something. Says, Al, you sometimes, one of my family challenged me, you sometimes speak too openly about things. I said, referring to something I said on a podcast. It's like, no, I don't listen to your podcast. Phew. So no, it's like something you said yesterday at the.
That's funny. Yeah.
I said, okay. I guess.
Yeah. That's tough. That's a tough one. The family.
No, but I actually, in my case, I see that it's I there has when I started like in therapy years ago, and originally I was addressing like sexual abuse and what happened to me as a child. I was kind of like the odd one out in my family, where it's like, oh, you went through a traumatic experience, so you need to do some healing, like poor you.
Right.
And now it's kind of reversed a little bit, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, where it's like, oh, you started on something I should have started on a long time ago. Something like that.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Even though for a lot of people that's really hard, right? To buck the family, structure in order to get free. Like I had to do that. My parents actually had a worse time with me joining an ashram and leaving the one true religion than with my being gay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
They
interesting.
had a tougher time. But then they started to say, right? They started to look in my eyes, and you can see
Right,
the
you're
peace,
happy.
you
Yeah,
can see
exactly.
the love, you can see
Yeah.
he's not going crazy.
Right. Right, quite the opposite. And then
Mm-hmm.
maybe someone mentions something to them like, hey, your son or brother or something,
Yeah.
had a real profound impact. It's like, really? That stuff is real?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah, eventually they'll look in our eyes and they'll say, huh, tell me about that meditation thing again. Tell me about that breath work. Tell me about
Right.
that plant medicine experience you had.
Yeah.
Or the temazcal or whatever it is.
Right.
It's sort of like becoming a beacon of light,
Right.
rather than trying to get them to come do it. Which is the human thing. Do you want to do it? Hey, come do it. Come
Right.
do
I
this.
started that at first. Like
Yeah.
my first couple years in therapy, I had like my whole family. I was like, whoever wants to go, it's sponsored by me. Like, go.
Yeah.
And no, now
Yeah,
it's
that doesn't work very well.
right. Now it's, I'd say, sometimes the reverse a little bit, where it's like, hey, I was thinking about, do you know what you're getting into? Like,
That's
you really,
good.
yeah. Like maybe more words of caution than
Yeah.
anything else, because some are valid, meaning in terms of your own journey, all you did was a breath work, but then you left your job and joined an ashram, right? So
Thank goodness.
thank goodness, right? Thank goodness is what
Yeah.
you're saying,
Yeah,
but
From their perspective, they
Right.
were freaking out.
right. But as much as
From their
someone
perspective, I was joining a cult.
right? Someone once asked me, how come, and they're very pro, like they're a healer of sorts, and they've guided a lot of people towards medicine and deeper healing and everything else. But they asked me, Eli, I'm just wondering, how come certain people go down this path and they become closer to the question was phrased as Judaism, but closer to their religion, and some become further away from it after they go through that process. So I thought about it and I said, well, I guess it depends where it's coming from for that person, right? If it's their truest expression and being used in a healthy way, then yeah, why not reinforce it?
Mhm.
But if it's not, it's going to tear it down. It is. And for many people, I've seen that happen. It's like, whoa, how can I, because religion is a great way to mask a lot of ills. I know a guy who
Yeah.
there's a law in Judaism, not many laws in Judaism, but one of the laws is that when you're praying, right, so the morning prayer by men is done with black straps in your arm. It's like rolled up scrolls, which has portions of the Bible on the hand and the head. It's called tefillin. And there's a law that you're not allowed to wear the tefillin if one needs to go to the bathroom. And he said he didn't get, from when he was 13, when he started putting them on, till he was in his mid-20s, he never once made it through a prayer without going to the bathroom. And to everyone around him, and there were many other examples of this very obsessive, attention to detail on like Jewish law is like, oh, what does it say here? What does it say here? Because he said what would happen is during the prayer, he would get into this headspace of, do I need to go to the bathroom? And we can ask that question to ourselves right now. It's like, do I need to? Well, if I went in there, maybe something would come out. I don't know, right? So he said he never got through a full 30, 40-minute prayer without having to take it off, saying, maybe I need to go to the bathroom. But what was interesting was that he was viewed as a model example of religious observance, where in any other context, someone would say, dude, you're OCD. Like, right, take care of this. So someone like this, obviously it wasn't an authentic expression of themselves. It was an expression of all of their fears and illnesses. Like, yeah, that was going to get teared down. But for someone else, It may be, hey, the truest expression of yourself is whatever that is. Oh, you're a rabbi and you're running a synagogue. Yeah, do that more fully and do these things within it. All of a sudden that comes out. And it's like, wow, this guy's, I see him getting more and more religious, through the process.
Yeah.
So I just found that as
Yeah,
interesting.
and there are layers, right? There are levels of religion. And I think what you're talking about, the reason that it's deep in your connection is because you're not focused on the more superficial ceremonial aspect, right? I'm not calling it dogmatic intentionally, though it could be.
Well, humans have the tendency to.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the truth is that you don't have to have anything around your arm, or you don't have to sit in a certain way to meditate to have a powerful connection. You don't need it.
Correct.
If you hold it intentionally, of course it can help you there. It can help you. That ceremony, that ritual trains the body to drop in. It brings you into that sacred space. In that sense, it can definitely help.
Yeah, there's a spirit behind all these things. One of the things I connect to when I'm putting it on is that, for thousands of years, this has been practiced by ancestors. And it's beautiful. Skipped it, but it's like when I'm doing this practice, I'm engaging in something that's kind of connecting me to a heritage of sorts. But of course, there are many.
If you're in a situation like on a deserted island and you didn't have it with you, you would still have amazing prayer and a deep connection.
What's interesting? In fact, on the holiest days in the Jewish calendar, like for Sabbath or other holidays, it's not used. Pray without it. It's almost like you don't need it on those days. So you're 100% right. It's not viewed as needed for prayer. It's a practice and a ritual that we engage in for one of the three prayers we do every day. And that's the way I connect to it. Whereas for a time when I was growing up, it was if I missed it on one day, I would feel guilt.
Right.
And then what I realized was that this association became not godly at all. It became guilty.
Guilt?
Guilt. I was like, I'm putting guilt on my arm today.
And then we rebel against it because
exactly.
it doesn't feel good.
Right.
So we say, screw that. I don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been a very kind of careful journey with me on religion and Judaism, but I feel it more and more as an expression of myself and a true expression. And, along with this, which didn't start as a religious thing, it started more as proud Jew response to anti-Semitism. I'd heard some things, like some politicians recommending a little less pride around being Jewish, like don't be so obvious so there isn't hate that comes towards you. I'm like, that's crazy.
Really? Yikes.
Yeah, just the opposite. In Europe, it's commonplace, by the way, to say that. Yeah, it's like, hey, don't be too obvious about the fact that you're Jewish, because
from the
like
rabbis?
politicians. No, politicians.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, then it becomes to everyone. When I was a kid, going to my grandparents and all my mom's family lives in France. When we would visit, they say wear a baseball cap or something. Don't make it obvious that you're Jewish, and that was commonplace in Europe. I had heard it then in America, like 2020 in COVID. I'm like, no, we can't let this happen here. So instinctively the response was, okay, more.
Yeah, it kind of makes more sense that it would be more prevalent in Europe.
Yeah, the Holocaust did start there after all. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had there's a lot. There was a lot we covered here. Yeah. I guess we can wrap it up on maybe some final thoughts.
Well, I want to go back to forgiveness, because forgiveness can seem really, really hard. Sometimes it can feel impossible. And there's stuff like, talking about things like sexual abuse, like especially things around kids, really difficult to forgive. And yet, to me, that's one of the three things that if you want to be free, there's no way around it. Right? Going within, it's no way around it if you want to be free. Forgiveness, and getting rid of the, tearing up the victim card. Those are the three things that I'm kind of dogmatic about, but not really, because if you show me a different way, then I would consider it. But right now, nobody has been able to show me
liberation without those three things.
How to free yourself without those three things. Yeah. And so, for anybody who might be watching this and who wants to move closer to that place of forgiveness, because sometimes we got to forgive what's unforgivable. And so here's what begins to open the door to that. Forgive, like 2 syllables, flip them around, give 4. What we're doing when we forgive is we're giving not the benefit of the doubt, but giving the other person, sometimes ourselves, because sometimes that's harder to do, self-forgiveness, the room to be human, to make mistakes, to fall short of the mark, to make a royal mess of things. And it's like the ego, like we've been talking about, is totally self-righteous. I would never do that. Right? So it creates that distance, that separation, which is one of the reasons that makes forgiveness difficult to do, because I have to give that up, that self-righteous stance. And so forgiveness begins to bring in the question marks. Like, I can't even imagine that I could ever do that. But maybe if I had been in their shoes, if I had been raised in that way at that time, if I had had their experiences, who knows what was going on with our brain biochemistry, who knows if there was substance abuse, maybe, I can't even see it, but maybe I too might have done the same.
You know Byron Katie?
Yeah.
So she says, if I believed what they believed, I would murder too.
Yeah.
So she kind of turns it into not the person, but the beliefs that a person holds. We all hold beliefs that are not so helpful.
Yeah.
So they, for whatever reason, believe some things that are not so helpful.
Yeah, and here's like let's like take it to the extreme. A terrorist. Like, nobody watching this is going to wrap their body in explosives and go to a mall and detonate themselves. But so that's really easy to otherize, to separate from. I would never do that. Right? But let's look into that. Have we ever terrorized anybody else emotionally? Have we ever terrorized ourselves? That's a definite yes. We all have.
Right. Have we ever hurt ourselves?
We all have.
Just to hurt someone else.
We all
a little
have.
more.
And so we too have that inner terrorist. It looks completely different, but it begins to soften that harsh separation that I would never do that. The details are different.
Right. But the energy of it is similar.
Yeah.
I certainly
and that begins to make forgiveness possible. And again, it doesn't make it all right. It doesn't rationalize it. It doesn't excuse it. It's not that. But it begins to free ourselves, because we're harming ourselves by holding on to that.
You know, one of the things I did with the sexual abuse is, for years I felt like I was the weaker person, he was a stronger person, because in my case, sort of physically overpowered me when he abused me. And at one point it just clicked, and I said, I'd rather my memories than his.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Oh my God. He has a much steeper uphill climb than mine. I was abused. He's got to face himself now.
Oh my God. I wouldn't want to be inside of his head.
Right. So that was one. And then another way, which I guess is the spiritual path, is kind of zooming out. There's this Jewish principle that before a soul enters the world, or I say a Jewish teacher who teaches that before a soul enters the world, a spiritual teacher, that prior entering the world, it sees all of the hardships it's going to have to go through, and it says, do you accept or not? And if it doesn't accept, it doesn't enter the world. So, from that perspective, it's okay, so why would I sign up for this? Why would I agree to go through this, 3-year period of being sexually abused? And the way I've put it now, and again, I may be believing total crock of shit, but it makes me feel a lot better, so bear with me on it, is that for where my family was, there was kind of this idea that set in, which has set into a lot deep into a lot of Jews, is this idea that it's okay to suffer horrible lives. Like, it's okay to be miserable and difficult. And I know there's certain tropes around Jews, but where I grew up, most were impoverished, deeply impoverished. And there was this idea that it's okay, somehow suffering in this world eases suffering in the next world. These crazy ideas around just being okay with miserable reality.
That's very Christian too.
What?
That's very Christian too.
These ideas with their sister religions. So, but this was in my family very deeply. Yeah. Like, it's okay, it's normal. This is a very, it's okay to have something, like to struggle in that way. Like, this is very normal. You don't have to address it. But this was too much, right? Like, sexual abuse, when I stepped out and said, hey, like, I'm going to go to therapy, I'm going to do something for this, I was like, oh, of course you're sexually abused, meaning it was outside of the framework of acceptable suffering and struggling. I want to put a lot more things into the framework of acceptable struggling, right? Being overweight. Yes. Some people, they breathe hard every time they sit up. Like, that's too much suffering. Poverty, unacceptable suffering.
Yes.
There's so many things that I'd like to put back in.
I'm with you.
So what I feel like is that I chose as a soul to say, you know what, here's this family kind of here, and there's this one lie that maybe I can expose. And I'm not going to be able to expose it by talking. I'm going to have to expose it by undergoing something difficult. And then once I'm able to do that, right, and kind of the proof is what's happened. Once I went through that process of healing, they said, oh, wow, this has nothing to do with the sexual abuse. This is the path we all should be on. And we shouldn't be accepting this level of suffering within us. To me, it was like, hey, I chose this path.
Yeah. And that's the ultimate taking personal responsibility for it. That's the ultimate freeing yourself from victimization. I don't know about that. Like, I can go there. There are other teachings that teach that like you choose everything, the parents you're born into, the culture, all of it. I can totally go there. I could see why at a soul level we give
it would be very cruel to put on someone else this perspective. But for me, it's the way I embraced it.
Yeah, but I could see like why we give ourselves challenges so that we have to grow and something to buck up against and grow and evolve. So there's definite opportunities there. But I can't tell you with certainty that's the way it is. We choose everything at a soul level. I don't know. I can totally go there as a possibility. It makes sense to me, but I can't prove it. I can't tell you that's the way it is. But this I know without a shadow of a doubt, that no matter what happened, no matter what happens, we always get to choose how we show up in response. And that alone is enough to pop us out of victim.
Amen. We can call this podcast an ode to Viktor Frankl.
Yes. Yes.
We'll go with that.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
I really appreciate this conversation and the work we've done together. I look forward to more.
Thank you.